Good morning. Well, I decided to make this little video because I was thinking this weekend about why we read and why I love to read and why many of you love to read, and maybe why some of you don't love to read, and how I might convince you of the power of reading. And as I was thinking this weekend, the first quote, the first idea that came to me was that by the great critic, intellectual C.S. Lewis, who said, and I don't know if he said this in something he wrote. I remember seeing it in a movie called Shadowlands, which was made like in 1993 or something like that. And in that movie, C.S. Lewis was attributed to have said, we read to know that we are not alone. And I thought that was a beautiful and telling sentiment, that we read because we find in characters people like ourselves and people not like ourselves at all. And it creates a sense of connection with the other. And sometimes that other is very much like us. So we feel like if there is someone else like us or thinking like we do, then we are not entirely unique, and that people have been there before in our position or in our thought process or in our in our physical state of being. And that's comforting. But I think also that sentiment implies that we read to discover people who are unlike us, people who are different, people who maybe have a different history or cultural background. And that sort of broadens our horizons and helps us understand people who are not like us, recognizing their value and their contribution, but also in their differences, how much like us they are. I think that's why when your English teachers bug you about theme, it's because if you're reading carefully, you should see yourself in everything you read. Now, in The Handmaid's Tale, clearly, I'm guessing, none of you are handmaids who have to make babies for your country. But certainly Offred's position, her loneliness, her attempt to find some sort of agency, her attempt to, her desire to steal a flower so that she feels like she's alive, is something we should all be able to relate to. Maybe not the stealing the flower, but the idea of doing things that make us feel as if we matter and as if we have our own, what's called agency. We're able to act of our own choice. And so when there doesn't feel to be any freedom, she seeks an action that brings her freedom. And so the commander, I hope we can't relate to the commander, but certainly in the commander there is something that speaks to us of power and power over another human being. And we might not be in the position of the commander, we might be in the position of he or she who is controlled. So the point is that even when we can't relate to characters we read about because we're not in that same situation, we can relate to aspects of their lives or aspects of their psyche and feel the need to find out what happens. And that's why literature, plots and conflicts call to us, because we want to find out what happens to those people who are in some ways like us and some ways very different. Now, the psychologist Carl Jung believed that there exist in our collective unconscious, that means we all kind of have them embedded in our being, in our psyche, that we have innately in us the sort of structure of myth. And those myths, those ancient myths, he believes, are sort of structures within our unconscious, and that those things we relate to very strongly, like the myth of the journey, the of various trials and tribulations that occur in myth. And he says we are trying to kind of reconnect with that collective unconscious, that we all have that same desire and that same connectedness to those myths and stories. And that's why he believes that there are these things called archetypes, right? You learned about those, I'm sure, before. But there's the mother archetype and the villain archetype and the archetype of the journey. And there are all these, the archetype of the hero and his journey. So that's what Carl Jung believes. And I think that's very powerful to connect to realize we're all seeking, almost without our knowledge, stories that tell us the nature of our being and the nature of, all of history's being. I think we also read because we are presented with situations in stories that raise our consciousness or raise our questioning. And I was reading, it was funny, last night I was reading this article, a study that was done to find out if people who read a lot, people who are readers, if they're more moral. And their findings were that they are. And maybe because in literature you're faced with all of these situations and you learn to be empathetic to other people. And then you do the right thing more often. I'm not sure this is a true study, but it seems to kind of make sense, sort of, logically speaking. So, that's part of why we read. We read to find ourselves. And in the other subjects, we learn very practical things that are useful for our survival or for our future studies. But I think that English and reading specifically speak to our humanity. And it's the only class you absolutely have to take for 4 years in high school. And I think it's partly because we are trying to build a sense of that empathy for others, but also, and more importantly to me, the understanding of a writer. Now, I'm a writer, I love to write, and the more I read, the more I feel like I'm never going to be a good enough writer. But I read for the art. Just like you go to a museum and you look at paintings, you might understand how a writer is working. And the writer is always at work in a piece of literature and is always creating. And everything that they do, almost everything that they do, is a choice that they're making to tell the story a certain way, to evoke in us the kind of emotional response, but also critical response they're hoping for. So that's kind of my take on reading that I'll be bringing to you this year. Is I like to think of authors creating worlds that of their imagination, but those worlds that they want to communicate to us so much that, oh, here come my dogs, they want to communicate to us so much that every word counts. This is Abigail. She's my puppy. She is an English Mastiff puppy. She's huge. Okay, go away. But anyway, that's what I want to be looking at with you, is how the author is able to create this understanding among all of the readers. Now, we don't always have to agree on a piece of literature and what it means, but clearly the artist is at work in trying to create a sense of something, a sense of place. Like I remember reading some responses to The Handmaid's Tale, and some people said they couldn't put it down because it was so compelling, and others said they couldn't hang on to it because it was so frightening. And I think that's important to recognize that in both cases, Margaret Atwood has succeeded in creating a world that we go into, and then I don't even know what I was saying now. Abigail snorted on me. Anyway, so that is my little pitch for reading. Some of you don't need a pitch for reading. Some of you might need a little pitch for reading. But I wanted to let you know how I approach it. I approach it both as an historical, cultural document, and of a personal document that we can relate to the people within it. I'm going to ask you all year, especially when we get to Hamlet, because people think, oh my gosh, that's Shakespeare. But if you can see the characters as if they are real people, as if they have motivations that are real motivations, and that they are somehow like us or like people we know, then you can find a window into just about anything. And then we look at it through the lens of the artist and how the artist sees and creates through words, through structures, through even how he or she divides the book into pieces and chunks. That's what we want to look at and see how that works. All right? That's my little pitch, my 11-minute pitch. I just looked at the time. I have a lot to say, don't I? Well, anyway, I hope you have a lot to say, and I hope you open your mind and your heart to everything we're going to read this year, and that you see what you can do even better than you've done before. All right? Okay, that's it. Thank you.